The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Medical Center as Dr. Richard Harrison adjusted his surgical mask and looked at his watch. Another day, another chance to prove he was the best trauma surgeon on the base. He stood in the break room with 3 other doctors, drinking coffee and discussing their upcoming shift. "Did you see the limping nurse again this morning?" Dr. Harrison said with a smirk. "I still can't believe they keep her around here." Dr. Sarah Mills looked uncomfortable. "She's actually very good at her job, Richard." "Good at what? Moving slowly down the hallways?" Dr. Harrison laughed. "We need people who can move fast in trauma situations, not someone who can barely walk without help." Just then, Nurse Rebecca Chen walked past the break room window. She moved with a slight but noticeable limp, her left leg requiring careful placement with each step. Her black hair had streaks of gray despite her young age of 32. She wore clean scrubs and carried herself with quiet dignity, ignoring the stares she often received. Dr. Harrison watched her pass and shook his head. "See what I mean? How is she supposed to help in an emergency when she can't even walk properly? They should have retired her completely instead of keeping broken staff around." Dr. James Patel, a younger surgeon, frowned. "That seems harsh. She's been here 6 months and hasn't made any mistakes I've seen." "Mistakes we know about," Dr. Harrison corrected. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm trying to run an efficient trauma unit. We get the worst cases here. Wounded soldiers, sailors, Marines. They deserve medical staff who are at 100%, not damaged goods." The conversation stopped when the hospital intercom crackled to life. "All trauma staff to Bay 3 immediately. Incoming critical patient. ETA 2 minutes. Dr. Harrison threw his coffee cup away and headed for the door. "This is what I'm talking about. Let's see how the limping nurse handles a real emergency." Rebecca Chen was already in Trauma Bay 3, checking equipment and preparing supplies. She moved with practiced efficiency despite her limp, ensuring everything was in its proper place. Her hands were steady as she arranged surgical instruments and checked the monitors. The ambulance sirens grew louder outside. Through the windows, they could see the emergency vehicle pulling up to the trauma entrance. The back doors flew open and paramedics rushed out with a stretcher. "What do we have?" Dr. Harrison called out as the patient was wheeled in. "Navy SEAL captain, multiple shrapnel wounds, possible internal bleeding," the paramedic reported breathlessly. "Found unconscious at a training accident. Vitals are weak but stable." Rebecca looked at the unconscious man on the gurney. He was tall and muscular, even while lying still. His face was pale, and blood soaked through multiple bandages on his arms and chest. His uniform name tag read, Torres M. Dr. Harrison immediately took charge. "Get him connected to monitors. I need blood work, X-rays, and someone find out what kind of shrapnel we're dealing with." Rebecca moved quietly around the room, anticipating what the doctors would need before they asked. She handed instruments to Dr. Harrison and monitored the patient's vital signs. Her limp didn't slow her down as she worked. "Nurse Chen, can you move faster, please?" Dr. Harrison said impatiently. "This man's life depends on speed." Rebecca didn't respond to the comment but continued her work. She noticed something in the patient's wounds that made her pause. The shrapnel patterns looked familiar, like something she had seen before in a different place and time. Dr. Patel was examining the X-rays. "These wounds are deep. Some of this metal is very close to major organs." "I can see that," Dr. Harrison snapped. "Prep for surgery. We need to get him to the operating room now." As they prepared to move Captain Torres, his blood pressure dropped suddenly. The monitors began beeping urgently. "He's crashing," Dr. Mills announced. Dr. Harrison's confident expression changed to concern. "Give me epinephrine. Start CPR if we lose him." Rebecca watched the monitors carefully. She had seen this pattern before. The specific way blood pressure dropped with this type of shrapnel wound. There was a technique that could help, something not taught in regular medical school. "Doctor," she said quietly, I think there might be a better approach. Dr. Harrison didn't look up from the patient. Not now, nurse. I need to concentrate. But if you adjust the pressure point near his left shoulder... I said not now. Dr. Harrison's voice was sharp. Your job is to hand me instruments, not give medical advice, especially when you can barely do your basic duties. Rebecca stepped back, her face showing no emotion. But her eyes stayed on Captain Torres, watching his condition worsen. Dr. Patel noticed her expression. What were you going to say? Nurse Chen? Before Rebecca could answer, the patient's heart rate spiked dangerously. Dr. Harrison was sweating now, his earlier confidence gone. The standard procedures weren't working. Come on, Dr. Harrison muttered. Why isn't he responding? Rebecca moved closer to the gurney. Despite Dr. Harrison's dismissal, she began preparing equipment that might be needed for the approach she had suggested. Her movements were precise and professional. Dr. Mills looked at the monitors with growing concern. Richard, his numbers are getting worse. I can see that. Dr. Harrison's voice cracked slightly. The room filled with tension as Captain Torres fought for his life. The steady beeping of machines created an urgent rhythm. Rebecca continued working quietly, her limp forgotten in the intensity of the moment. She glanced at the unconscious SEAL's face and felt something stir in her memory. Something about his features seemed familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. Dr. Patel noticed how Rebecca was watching the patient. Do you know him? Rebecca shook her head slowly. I'm not sure. But as she looked at Captain Torres again, a distant memory began to surface. A memory of dust and heat and the sound of gunfire. A memory she had tried very hard to forget. The monitors continued their urgent beeping as the trauma team fought to save the wounded warrior's life. Captain Torres's condition grew worse by the minute. The monitors showed his blood pressure dropping steadily while his heart rate jumped up and down like a wild animal. Dr. Biat. Harrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he worked frantically to stop the bleeding. Give me more gauze, he demanded. And where's that blood work? Dr. Mills handed him fresh bandages while checking the test results on her tablet. Blood work shows massive internal bleeding. His red blood cell count is dropping fast. Rebecca Chen watched from the side of the gurney, her trained eyes taking in details the others might miss. She noticed how the shrapnel had entered the body at specific angles. This wasn't random damage from an accident. These wounds followed a pattern she recognized. We need to get him to surgery now, Dr. Harrison announced. Prep the operating room. But as they prepared to move Captain Torres, his breathing became shallow and irregular. The oxygen monitor started flashing red warnings. His lungs are filling with fluid, Dr. Patel observed, his voice tight with worry. Dr. Harrison tried the standard treatment, but nothing seemed to work. Each procedure that should have helped only made things worse. The confident surgeon was now clearly struggling. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Why isn't he responding to treatment? Rebecca stepped closer to the gurney. She had been studying the wounds carefully, and now she was certain about what she was seeing. These injuries matched ones she had treated before, in very different circumstances. Dr. Harrison, she said quietly, I think the shrapnel might have caused pressure on his thoracic cavity. If you release the pressure point near his collarbone... I told you to stay quiet, Dr. Harrison snapped without looking at her. I don't need nursing advice right now. But Dr. Patel had been listening. He moved closer to Rebecca. What kind of pressure point? Rebecca hesitated for a moment, then pointed to a specific spot on Captain Torres's chest. There. If metal fragments are pressing against the nerve cluster, it could cause the fluid buildup in his lungs. I've seen it before. Where have you seen it before? Dr. Patel asked with curiosity. Before Rebecca could answer, Captain Torres's heart monitor started showing an irregular rhythm. The beeping became erratic and frightening. He's going into cardiac arrest, Dr. Mills announced. Dr. Harrison's face went pale. "Start chest compressions. Get the defibrillator ready." The trauma team jumped into action, but Rebecca could see they were following textbook procedures that wouldn't work for this specific type of injury. She had seen these exact wounds before, in a place where textbooks meant nothing and you had to improvise to save lives. "Dr. Harrison," she tried again, "please listen to me. This isn't a normal trauma case." "Not now," he yelled, pushing past her to reach the defibrillator. Rebecca watched as they shocked Captain Torres's chest. His body jumped, but the heart monitor showed no improvement. They tried again with the same result. Dr. Patel noticed Rebecca's expression. She looked like someone watching a mistake happen, someone who knew a better way but couldn't get anyone to listen. "What would you do differently?" he asked her quietly. Rebecca looked at the dying man on the gurney. Professional rules said she should stay silent and let the doctors handle it. But something deeper than rules was calling to her, something that remembered other wounded warriors who had needed help when textbook medicine wasn't enough. "The shrapnel creates a cascade effect," she explained quickly. "You have to treat the pressure points in a specific order. First the collarbone area, then the lower ribs, then you can address the internal bleeding." "That's not standard procedure," Dr. Mills said uncertainly. "Standard procedures don't always work in combat situations," Rebecca replied, then stopped. She had said too much. Dr. Patel stared at her. "Combat situations? How would you know about combat medicine?" Before Rebecca could answer, Captain Torres flatlined completely. The monitor showed a straight line across the screen, and the room filled with the continuous beep that every medical professional feared. "We're losing him," Dr. Harrison said desperately. Rebecca made a decision. She moved quickly to the gurney, her limp forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Her hands went to the exact pressure points she had identified earlier. "Nurse Chen, what are you doing?" Dr. Harrison demanded. "Saving his life," Rebecca said firmly. Her fingers found the spots where shrapnel was creating pressure on nerves and blood vessels. She applied pressure in a specific sequence, a technique she had learned in the dusty medical tents of Afghanistan. "This is highly irregular," Dr. Harrison protested. But Dr. Patel was watching carefully. "Let her work. Nothing else has helped." Rebecca's hands moved with confidence and precision. Despite her damaged leg, her upper body strength and manual dexterity were perfect. She found each pressure point and released the trapped fluids and pressure that were killing Captain Torres. Suddenly, the heart monitor beeped once, then twice. Then it settled into a steady rhythm. "His heart rate is coming back," Dr. Mills said in amazement. Rebecca continued working, her movements showing years of experience with exactly this type of injury. She knew where to press and how long to hold pressure. Her technique was not something learned in medical school. "Blood pressure is rising," Dr. Patel reported, watching the monitors in disbelief. Captain Torres's breathing became deeper and more regular. The color returned to his face as his circulation improved. The crisis was passing. Dr. Harrison stared at Rebecca with a mixture of shock and confusion. "How did you know how to do that?" Rebecca stepped back from the gurney, her professional mask back in place. "Lucky guess." But Dr. Patel wasn't satisfied with that answer. He had been watching her technique carefully. "That wasn't luck. You've done this before. Those were field trauma procedures." Rebecca didn't respond. She began cleaning up the medical supplies, moving efficiently around the room. But Dr. Patel noticed something else now. The way she moved, despite her limp, had a military precision. The way she organized equipment showed tactical thinking. "Nurse Chen," Dr. Patel said slowly, "what did you do before you worked here?" Rebecca paused in her cleaning. For just a moment, her careful control slipped, and something haunted flashed across her eyes. "I was a nurse," she said simply. But Dr. Patel was beginning to understand that there was much more to Rebecca Chen's story than anyone at the hospital knew. 3 days passed before Captain Torres opened his eyes. Rebecca had been checking his monitors during the quiet hours of the night shift when she noticed his breathing change. His eyelids fluttered, and then slowly, deliberately, they opened. The intensive care unit was dimly lit, with only the soft glow of medical equipment providing light. Rebecca was alone with the patient, having sent the other night nurse to check on different patients down the hall. Captain Torres's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. His throat was dry from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier that day. When his gaze finally settled on Rebecca, she saw his pupils focus with recognition. "Water," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Rebecca immediately reached for the cup of ice chips she had prepared. "Just small pieces," she said softly, placing a chip on his tongue. "Your throat needs time to recover." As Torres sucked on the ice, his eyes never left Rebecca's face. She could see him thinking, remembering, trying to place where he had seen her before. "Do you know where you are?" Rebecca asked, following standard procedure for patients recovering from serious trauma. "Hospital," Torres managed to say. "Naval Medical Center." "That's right. You've been unconscious for 3 days. You had surgery to remove shrapnel from a training accident." Torres nodded weakly, but his eyes showed confusion. "Training accident?" he repeated slowly. Rebecca checked his IV and adjusted his pillows to make him more comfortable. "That's what they told us. You were brought in with multiple shrapnel wounds." Something in Torres's expression changed. His eyes became sharper, more focused. He studied Rebecca's face intently, as if he were solving a puzzle. "You look familiar," he said carefully. "I've been taking care of you," Rebecca replied. "You've probably seen me in and out of consciousness." But Torres shook his head slightly. "No. From before." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. She had been hoping he wouldn't remember. She had prayed that if this was who she thought it might be, the trauma would have affected his memory. "I don't think we've met before," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Torres continued staring at her. His mind was clearing more each minute, and memories were surfacing like bubbles in water. "Your hair was longer," he said suddenly. "And it didn't have gray in it." Rebecca's hand stopped moving. She stood perfectly still next to his bed. "You were wearing different clothes, too," Torres continued, his voice getting stronger. "Desert camouflage, and you had blood on your hands, but it wasn't your blood." "Captain Torres, you need to rest," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice professional. "Head trauma can cause confusion and false memories." "It was in Syria," Torres said, ignoring her attempt to redirect the conversation. 2 years ago, the mission that went wrong." Rebecca's composure finally cracked slightly. "I think you have me confused with someone else." Torres tried to sit up, but the effort was too much. He fell back against his pillows, breathing heavily. "Doc, is that really you?" The question hung in the air between them. Rebecca stood frozen, torn between her desire to remain anonymous and something deeper that responded to being called by that old title. "My name is Nurse Chen," she said quietly. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," Torres corrected, and there was no confusion in his voice now. "Navy Medical Corps, trauma surgeon, the doc who saved my whole team when everyone else said we were dead." At that moment, Dr. Patel entered the room for his late-night patient check. He immediately noticed the tension in the air and the strange expression on Rebecca's face. "Is everything all right?" Dr. Patel asked. Captain Torres turned toward the doctor, and his voice carried the authority of a military officer despite his weakened condition. "Doctor, I need you to understand something about Nurse Chen." "Captain Torres, please don't," Rebecca started to say. "She's not just a nurse," Torres interrupted, his eyes burning with intensity. "She's a decorated Navy surgeon who saved my life and the lives of 3 other SEALs during a classified mission." Dr. Patel looked back and forth between them, confusion written across his face. I don't understand. Torres struggled to push himself up in bed again. This time, Rebecca moved to help him, but he waved her away. No, ma'am. This time, let me help you. With tremendous effort, Captain Torres managed to swing his legs over the side of the bed. Rebecca and Dr. Patel both moved to stop him, but he held up a hand. Captain, you're too weak, Dr. Patel protested. You need to stay in bed. But Torres was determined. Using the bed rail for support, he pulled himself to his feet. His legs shook from the effort, and sweat beaded on his forehead, but he stood as straight as his condition allowed. 2 years ago, my team was trapped behind enemy lines, Torres said, his voice carrying clearly now. Wounded, outnumbered, with no way out. Command wrote us off as lost. Dr. Patel stared in fascination as Torres continued his story. Then this woman, Torres nodded toward Rebecca, volunteered for a suicide mission to extract us. She flew into a combat zone, performed surgery in the back of a moving vehicle while under fire, and got us out when nobody else would even try. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent. Torres looked directly at her. She saved 4 lives that day and took shrapnel that ended her surgical career. She's a hero who never got the recognition she deserved because the mission was classified. With great effort, Torres raised his right hand to his temple in a perfect military salute. Ma'am, it is an honor to serve with you again. The room fell completely silent except for the soft humming of medical equipment. Dr. Patel stared in shock, his mouth slightly open. Rebecca stood motionless, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. At that moment, Dr. Harrison appeared in the doorway. He had come to check on his patient, and instead walked into a scene that made no sense to him. What's going on here? Dr. Harrison demanded. Captain Torres, you need to get back in bed immediately. Torres lowered his salute but kept his eyes on Rebecca. Sir, I was showing proper respect to Lieutenant Commander Chen. Dr. Harrison looked confused and annoyed. That's Nurse Chen and she needs to— No, sir, Torres interrupted firmly. That's Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Chen, United States Navy Medical Corps, and she deserves your respect and mine. The weight of Torres's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Dr. Harrison's expression slowly changed from annoyance to confusion to something approaching shock. Rebecca finally found her voice. Captain Torres, please get back in bed. You're going to hurt yourself. Torres smiled weakly, but allowed them to help him back onto the gurney. Yes, ma'am, but the truth needed to be said. Word spread quickly through the Naval Medical Center. By morning, everyone was talking about the limping nurse who was apparently a decorated war hero. Dr. A. Patel had spent the night researching what he could find about classified Navy medical operations, but most records were sealed. Captain Torres was much stronger when he woke up the next day. Rebecca was checking his vital signs when he asked her to sit down. Doc, people deserve to know what really happened, he said quietly. What you did for us. Rebecca shook her head. The mission was classified. You know that. The mission details are classified, Torres corrected. But your heroism isn't. And these people have been treating you badly because they don't understand who you are. Dr. Patel entered the room with coffee and a concerned expression. Captain Torres, I hope you don't mind, but I've been thinking about what you said last night. Could you tell me what happened? I promise anything classified will stay confidential. Torres looked at Rebecca, who sighed and nodded reluctantly. It was September 2023, Torres began. My SEAL team was conducting a reconnaissance mission in eastern Syria. Intelligence said the area was clear, but we walked into an ambush. 4 of us were wounded, and we were pinned down in a building with no way out. Rebecca sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, as Torres continued his story. The enemy had us surrounded. Our radio was damaged, and our extraction helicopter couldn't get close because of heavy anti-aircraft fire. Command made the decision to write us off. They said it was too dangerous to send in a rescue mission. Dr. Patel leaned forward in his chair. What changed their minds? Lieutenant Commander Chen did, Torres said, looking at Rebecca with obvious respect. She was stationed at a field hospital about 50 miles away. When she heard about our situation, she volunteered to lead an extraction team. Rebecca finally spoke up. It wasn't supposed to be a combat mission. We were just going to provide medical support if they could get the team out safely. Torres laughed bitterly. Nothing about that day was safe. Doc flew into a hot zone in a medical transport helicopter, with 2 medics and a pilot who was probably crazy enough to try anything. The plan was simple, Rebecca continued, her voice quiet but steady. Land outside the combat zone, provide emergency medical care, and evacuate the wounded to a safer location for full treatment. But the plan went wrong from the beginning, Torres added. The landing zone was compromised. As soon as the helicopter touched down, we started taking fire. Dr. Patel could see the painful memories in both their faces. Rebecca took a deep breath before continuing. Torres and 1 other SEAL were unconscious from blood loss. The other 2 were conscious but barely able to move. We had to get them to the helicopter under direct enemy fire. That's when Doc did something I've never seen before or since, Torres said with admiration. She grabbed her medical kit and ran across 50 yards of open ground while bullets were flying past her head. It was the only way, Rebecca said simply. They were dying, and waiting wasn't an option. Torres turned to Dr. Patel. She performed emergency surgery on 3 of us in the back of that helicopter while we were flying out of the combat zone. No proper lighting, no surgical table, and with the aircraft shaking from engine damage and enemy fire. The pilot was hit during takeoff, Rebecca added. Our co-pilot was trying to fly a damaged aircraft while we performed surgery in the cargo area. We were about 10 minutes from the safe zone when an IED exploded near our flight path, Torres continued, his voice becoming heavy with emotion. The explosion threw our helicopter sideways and sent debris through the cabin. Dr. Patel noticed Rebecca unconsciously rubbing her left leg. There was a piece of shrapnel about the size of a dinner plate flying straight at my chest, Torres said quietly. Doc saw it coming and threw herself on top of me. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. It was the only way to protect him. He was already unconscious from blood loss. The metal went through her left leg instead of my chest, Torres continued. Shattered her femur, damaged her knee, tore up muscles and nerves, but she didn't stop working. Even with her own leg destroyed, she kept doing surgery on the rest of us until we reached the medical base. Dr. Patel stared at Rebecca with new understanding. That's how you got your limp. Rebecca nodded but didn't elaborate. The doctors at the base said she saved all 4 of our lives, Torres continued, but her surgical career was over. The damage to her leg meant she couldn't stand for long periods anymore. No more operating room work. Why wasn't this public? Dr. Patel asked. This sounds like the kind of heroism that should be recognized. Torres's expression darkened. Because our mission was classified. The Syria operation officially never happened. Doc's heroism was buried in secret files that most people will never see. I received a medical discharge with honors, Rebecca added. Full pension, medical care, but no public recognition. The Navy takes care of its own, but they also keep their secrets. Dr. Patel was quiet for a moment, processing everything he had heard. So you came here to work as a nurse? It was the only way I could still help soldiers, Rebecca said. I couldn't perform surgery anymore, but I could still provide care. At that moment, Dr. Harrison entered the room. He had obviously heard parts of the conversation from the hallway, and his face was red with embarrassment. Lieutenant Commander Chen, he said formally, I owe you an apology. Rebecca stood up, her limp more noticeable as she moved. That's not necessary, Dr. Harrison. Yes, it is, Dr. Harrison insisted. I've been treating a decorated war hero like she was incompetent, and I'm ashamed of my behavior." Torres looked at Dr. Harrison with the stern expression of a military officer. "Doctor, Lieutenant Commander Chen saved 4 Navy SEALs at the cost of her own career. She's continued serving by taking care of wounded warriors like me. I suggest you treat her with the respect she's earned." Dr. Harrison nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right, Captain, and I intend to make sure everyone on this staff knows the truth." Rebecca looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I just want to do my job and help patients recover." "Ma'am," Torres said with a smile, "you've been doing that all along. Now everyone else will finally understand why you're so good at it." Dr. Patel stood up and extended his hand to Rebecca. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, it would be an honor to work with you as a colleague, not just a nurse." As Rebecca shook his hand, Dr. Harrison realized that everything about the hospital's trauma unit was about to change. The change in the hospital was immediate and dramatic. By the end of the week, every staff member knew the truth about Rebecca Chen. Nurses who had ignored her before now greeted her with respect. Doctors who had barely acknowledged her presence began asking for her input on difficult cases. Dr. Harrison submitted a formal request to the hospital administration. He wanted Rebecca added to the trauma team for all special forces and military cases. His request included a detailed explanation of her unique qualifications and field experience. "Lieutenant Commander Chen's expertise in combat trauma medicine is invaluable," he wrote in his report. "Her knowledge of field procedures and battlefield injuries exceeds that of any other medical professional on our staff." Rebecca was uncomfortable with the attention at first. She had been content to work quietly in the background, helping patients recover without recognition. But Dr. Patel convinced her that sharing her knowledge could save more lives. "Think about it this way," he said during their conversation in the break room. "Every military patient who comes through here could benefit from what you learned in Syria and Afghanistan. Isn't that worth stepping out of the shadows?" Captain Torres recovered quickly under Rebecca's continued care. As word spread among the SEAL community, other Special Forces personnel began requesting the limping nurse specifically when they needed medical treatment. A young Marine corporal who had lost his leg in Iraq was struggling with physical therapy. His progress was slow, and he was becoming depressed about his future. When Rebecca was assigned to his care, something changed. "I know it's hard," she told him during one of their sessions. "I know exactly how hard it is." The Marine looked at her limp and understood. "You were injured in combat too?" "Syria. Shrapnel through my left leg." Rebecca helped him with his exercises. "The doctors told me my career was over. Said I'd never be able to do surgery again." "Do you miss it?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I miss being able to stand for 8 hours straight in an operating room. But I don't miss the career. I found a different way to serve." The Marine worked harder after that conversation. Within a month, his progress improved dramatically. He told other patients about the nurse who understood what combat injuries really meant, and soon Rebecca was requested by name for all wounded warrior cases. 3 weeks after Captain Torres's revelation, the base commander arrived at the hospital with several other officers. They found Rebecca in the intensive care unit, checking on a Navy pilot who had been injured in a training accident. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," the commander said formally, "could we speak with you privately?" Rebecca followed them to a small conference room, wondering what kind of trouble she might be in. Instead, she found a table set with certificates and military decorations. "The Navy Department has reviewed your service record," the commander began. "While the details of your Syria mission must remain classified, your heroism and sacrifice do not need to be hidden." Captain Torres was there, now fully recovered and back in uniform. "Ma'am, it took some work, but we were able to declassify the parts of the mission that involved your medical heroism." The commander picked up a citation from the table. Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Chen, for extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty while serving as a trauma surgeon during combat operations in Syria. Your selfless actions resulted in the successful evacuation and treatment of 4 wounded Navy personnel at great personal cost. Rebecca listened in shock as they read the full citation. When they finished, the commander pinned a Navy cross to her civilian clothes. "This recognition is long overdue," he said solemnly. "The Navy doesn't forget its heroes, even when their stories have to stay secret for a while." Several other SEAL team members were present, men whose lives Rebecca had saved during various missions. They formed a line and saluted her one by one. After the ceremony, Dr. Harrison approached Rebecca privately. His earlier arrogance was completely gone, replaced by genuine respect and embarrassment. "Lieutenant Commander, I need to tell you that I've requested a transfer to another hospital." Rebecca looked surprised. "That's not necessary, Doctor." "Yes, it is," Dr. Harrison insisted. "My behavior toward you was unprofessional and unacceptable. I let my prejudices blind me to your qualifications and your character." "We all make mistakes," Rebecca said gently. Dr. Harrison shook his head. "Not mistakes like this. I mocked a war hero because of her disability. I questioned the competence of someone who has more field experience than I'll ever have. That's not a mistake. It's a failure of character." His replacement was Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a former Army surgeon who had also served in combat zones. Her first action was to officially name Rebecca as the hospital's liaison for all Special Forces medical cases. "I've read your file," Dr. Walsh told Rebecca. "The classified parts and the parts that are public now. You're exactly what this trauma unit needs." 6 months later, Rebecca stood in Trauma Bay 3 again. Another wounded SEAL was being rushed in, this time from a real combat mission rather than a training accident. The young intern working with her noticed her limp as she moved around the patient. "Nurse Chen?" the intern asked quietly. "How did you hurt your leg?" Dr. Walsh overheard the question and smiled. "Dr. Martinez, that's Lieutenant Commander Chen, and she didn't hurt her leg. She sacrificed it to save 4 Navy SEALs during a classified mission in Syria." The intern's eyes widened with respect. Rebecca continued working, her hands steady and confident as she helped stabilize the wounded warrior. Her limp had not improved, and it never would. But it no longer represented limitation or disability to anyone who worked with her. Now it was a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and dedication that inspired everyone around her. As they prepared to move the patient to surgery, Rebecca caught sight of her reflection in the medical equipment. Gray streaks still marked her black hair, and her face showed the wear of difficult experiences. But her eyes held something they hadn't had in years: the satisfaction of being recognized not for her limitations, but for her service. The wounded SEAL on the gurney opened his eyes briefly as they moved him. "Thank you," he whispered. Rebecca smiled and squeezed his hand gently. "Just doing my job, sailor." But everyone in the room knew it was much more than just a job. It was a calling, a continuation of service that had never really ended. Rebecca Chen had found her way back to where she belonged, taking care of the warriors who protected others, using skills earned through sacrifice and validated by recognition long overdue. The limping nurse was finally seen for who she truly was, a hero who had never stopped serving.